Palmetto Conservative Show with your host, Jim Lee, bringing you all things conservative in the great state of South Carolina, from the upstate to the low country, from the coast to Columbia. If it's on your mind, it's on our show. So tune in, take notes, and let's make a stand. And now, it's the Palmetto Conservative Show. Let's jam.
Welcome into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee, part political junkie, part technology geek, part commentator, and sometimes snarky agitator for the application of common sense and the pursuit of critical thinking in the marketplace of ideas, particularly as it relates to the Palmetto State. I don't profess to have all the answers, folks, just an awful lot of relevant questions. It's been a while since we've been on the air here. Took a little sabbatical after taking some time away in June to complete a campaign for the South Carolina State Senate. I regret that I was unsuccessful in obtaining the nomination in a five-way primary, but nevertheless, it was an educational experience and one in which much has been learned and much will be learned as we go forward into the general election and we see what happens here in South Carolina. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as things go on. For those of you new to the show, usual and customary disclaimer. Not here to simply give speeches to display rancor, elicit vitriol, or vituperation, nor am I here to engender bitterness. I'm not here to throw incendiary language or to incite violence, but rather I'm here attempting to inflame your senses in the hope that we can engage in more of what I believe we desperately need in our political discourse, and that is far more critical thinking. I regret that due to technical difficulties this evening, there is no call-in number tonight, but we will get that fixed going forward and look forward to making the show a bit more interactive. But since I've been off the air since June, I've certainly got an awful lot of stuff in the hopper and much to talk about. Again, for those of you new to the show, I'm not here with the intent of simply throwing heat. My goal is to display more light than heat, and if that light generates heat, so be it. One of the things that we rail against regularly here on the Palmetto Conservative Show is the battle against the cacistocracy. Now, for those of you not familiar with cacistocracy, that is the government by the worst persons, or a form of government in which the worst persons are in power. I can't think of a more suitable word to fit our current state of affairs in Washington, to be sure, and generally speaking in Columbia as well. So with that, and as we move on to the synonym, I believe, to cacistocracy, the ineptocracy, a system of government where the least capable to lead are elected by the least capable of producing, and where the members of society least likely to sustain themselves or succeed are rewarded with goods and services paid for by the confiscated wealth of a diminishing number of producers. Yes, for those of you paying attention, this would be the dreaded 47% versus the 53%. Now, unlike Mr. Romney, who is being dogged by President Obama simply because he really has no record to run on, let me explain the 47% number. While that 47% does in fact contain a number of people that, due to no circumstances of their own, don't pay any federal income taxes, the point in that 47% is to recognize that at this point in time, almost half the people in this country do not contribute federal income taxes, whether they've earned the right not to, such as veterans and those who are on Social Security, or not. And the point is, the philosophical point is that without an active stake in the game, what incentive do they have to participate in the political process when it comes to, say, matters of federal taxation and the like? But anyway, that's kind of where we come from here on the Palmetto Conservative Show. Focus on national matters, certainly, but our intent is to focus principally on those matters that affect the Palmetto State. Of course, with the continuing overreach of our federal government these days, that pretty much means darn near anything's in play. And as we go through this evening's program, you'll find that we're going to be all over the place in terms of what's in play. So, glad you're with us tonight again. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show. I'm your host, Jim Lee, here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. Bear with me as I'm playing with new technology tonight, and hopeful that all things will go well this evening, and that the audio levels are good, the microphone is clear, and the content is, well, hopefully at least a little witty, if not even downright funny at times. As I mentioned at the outset of the show, took a sabbatical in June as the campaign came to a climax with the primary back in June. For those of you who haven't followed South Carolina politics closely, you may not be aware that we almost didn't really have primaries here in South Carolina in June. Nearly 250 candidates were thrown off the ballot due to, well, that's an entire 2-hour program trying to explain exactly what it was due to, but a ruling by the state Supreme Court and a screw-up of legislative proportions in our legislature that, due to a technicality, threw many candidates off the ballot for failing to properly qualify. In my view, it resulted, or it didn't result rather, but in my view, it was much ado about nothing, in particular, since it didn't apply to incumbents, but only to challengers in the primaries. But nevertheless, be that as it may, many of those 250 candidates decided to take matters into their own hands and pursue getting on the ballot as petition candidates. Now, in South Carolina, you can become a petition candidate by obtaining signatures of a certain percentage of the registered actual voters in your particular district for which you're seeking the office. And over 150 of those candidates did so. And those 150 candidates collected nearly 300,000 signatures to get themselves back on the ballot, so that the people of South Carolina legitimately have a choice as to who might represent them in the State House. So it'll be interesting to see what the real outcome is in a couple of weeks, certainly at the federal level, but here in South Carolina at the state level, where there are many incumbents who actually have challengers that aren't of the predominant opposite party, challengers that are actually independents, technically. So we'll be watching that very, very closely. There are a number of key races here in South Carolina that could turn the balance of power in the state Senate, for example. Here in South Carolina, our system of government is the weakest executive branch in the country and the strongest legislative branch, with much of that power being concentrated in the state Senate. And there are several long-tenured senators who are facing challengers for the first time, either in a primary or a general election, that the results of the November 6th election are going to have some very significant and long-term ramifications here in the Palmetto State. One that most in the Columbia area are aware of is the state Senate race between, Jakey Knotts, who is running under the Republican banner. Notice I didn't say that he was a Republican. I said that he was running under the Republican banner. And his challenger, Katrina Shealy, who is one of those candidates who was thrown off the ballot, who did go out and get the number of petitions necessary and is running an independent campaign. Senator Knox is a long-serving state senator from the Lexington area, and also sits on a number of committees in the Senate, most intriguing of which is Judiciary. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens should Senator Knotts be knocked off by the challenger. I might also point out that Senator Knotts, the Lexington County Republican Party has endorsed the independent challenger to Senator Knotts, who is running as a Republican. Also, Senator Setzler is being challenged also by another woman, but this one happens to be a conservative Republican who ran in the primary and was successful, or may have not had a challenger. I don't quite recall specifically there, but nevertheless, in the fall, the Democrat Setzler will be challenged by Republican D.D. Vaughters. And so not only are two of the longest sitting senators in South Carolina facing challengers, but they're facing challengers who are female. Now, in some parts of the country, that's no big deal. Here in the Palmetto State, we're really making some strides here over the last several years. We have not only a minority governor, but we have a female governor. First time in the history of South Carolina. We could not only see the first female senator elected in South Carolina, but we could have more than one. There's also another candidate here in the upstate who is running against a Democrat in the 7th district, and that is Jane Kaiser, another female Republican. So here in South Carolina, apparently we really don't have a war on women when it comes to Republicans, considering we have 3 Republican Senate challengers up against long-serving incumbents here in South Carolina. Also over in the Pickens County area, Rex Rice, who was thrown off the ballot in the primary, will be running as an independent against Senator Larry Martin. So Larry Martin holds a very significant position in the state Senate. I'm trying to remember his exact committee leadership positions, but he, of course, is advocating that, hey, I need to be reelected because I hold such a senior position, and that's how you obtain power and get things done in the state Senate, which regrettably is true. In South Carolina, the Senate is based on a seniority system. The rules are stacked in such a way that leadership and power is concentrated in the Senate. And even though in our state House we have a relatively conservative House that has passed several forms of legislation that would be beneficial to making South Carolina more competitive from an economic standpoint, from a more fiscal responsibility standpoint, and from the position of school choice, would make things so much better in South Carolina, only to see that legislation go over to the Senate and, die its usual death. Even more so here in South Carolina than up in Washington. The Senate is where good legislation goes to die in committee. Well, that's just a little kickoff and a teaser here on the Palmetto Conservative Show. When we come back, we'll kind of pick up there with a recap of last night's debate and the previous debate as well, and talk about what that means for the state of South Carolina as well as the country. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network.